The smallest decision of your life can change the rest of it forever. I remember thinking those words as I stared down at the leather wallet lying beside a rain-soaked bench in downtown Chicago. The evening rush had already begun. People hurried past beneath glowing streetlights, focused on trains, schedules, and the thousand responsibilities waiting for them at home. Nobody seemed to notice the wallet. For a moment, neither did I. I almost kept walking. Almost. But something made me stop. The cold wind tugged at my coat as I bent down and picked it up. It was heavier than I expected. Expensive, too. The dark leather looked nearly new despite the rain. I glanced around the crowded sidewalk, expecting someone to come running back in panic. Nobody did. The owner was gone. I stood there for several seconds debating what to do. My name is Sarah Bennett. I work at a small bookstore a few blocks away. My life is not complicated. I pay my bills. I help customers find novels they forgot they wanted. I drink too much coffee and spend most evenings reading by my apartment window. Finding a wallet in the middle of a busy Chicago sidewalk was not something that usually happened to me. Eventually I opened it just enough to find identification. The moment I saw the name, I froze. Michael Romano. Even I knew that name. Most people in the city did. He was one of those men who seemed to exist everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Successful businesses, charity events, newspaper articles, endless rumors. Some people admired him. Others avoided talking about him altogether. Nobody seemed completely comfortable discussing Michael Romano. I looked at the address listed on the identification card. Then I looked back at the wallet. Returning it suddenly felt more intimidating than it should have. Still, the decision had already been made the moment I picked it up. The next afternoon, after finishing my shift at the bookstore, I found myself standing outside an impressive office building in the financial district. Glass walls stretched toward the cloudy sky. Luxury cars lined the street. Everything about the place felt expensive, completely different from my world. A receptionist greeted me inside. I explained why I was there. Her expression changed immediately. She made a phone call and then politely asked me to wait. 10 minutes later, an elevator opened across the lobby. The room seemed to grow quieter. A tall man stepped out. Dark suit, calm expression, confident posture. He moved through the lobby with the kind of presence that made people instinctively notice him. Michael Romano looked nothing like the rumors people whispered about. He looked composed, focused, almost impossible to read. His eyes landed on the wallet in my hands. Then they shifted to me. For a brief moment, neither of us spoke. I suddenly became aware of every sound in the room. The elevator doors closing, the distant ringing of a phone, the soft rhythm of my own heartbeat. "You found it?" he finally asked. His voice was calm, lower than I expected. I nodded and handed it over. "I thought you might want it back." He accepted the wallet without immediately looking away. Most people would have checked the contents, counted everything, thanked me and moved on. Michael Romano simply studied me. There was curiosity in his expression, genuine curiosity, as though finding the wallet was not the interesting part of the story, as though somehow unexpectedly I was. After the initial meeting with Michael Romano, I stepped out of the office building, feeling a mixture of awe and anxiety that I had not expected. The city streets buzzed around me, indifferent to the encounter that had just taken place. I walked slowly, clutching my coat tighter against the chilly wind, and found a quiet cafe tucked away on a side street. I sat by the window, tracing the condensation on the glass with my finger, thinking about how ordinary my life had been before today, and how unexpectedly complicated it suddenly felt. The barista greeted me warmly, asking if I wanted my usual coffee, and I nodded, realizing that the comfort of routine was something I had almost forgotten. Across town, Michael Romano returned to his office, walking through corridors lined with glass and polished metal, feeling a subtle curiosity that was unfamiliar to him. Normally, meetings and schedules dictated every moment of his day, yet something about the wallet, about the girl who had returned it, lingered in his mind. He found himself recalling small details, the way she held herself, the seriousness in her eyes, the gentle firmness in her voice. Those moments were fleeting yet stubbornly present, interrupting his usual focus. Back at the cafe, I opened my notebook, trying to organize my thoughts, writing about the mundane day I had expected versus the extraordinary morning I had lived through. Each word seemed inadequate to capture the surreal blend of normalcy and disruption. The conversations around me faded as I became absorbed in reflection, considering how one small act could ripple into consequences far beyond what anyone could anticipate. In the hours that followed, I went through the city on errands, carrying a heightened awareness of every interaction. I noticed the way strangers moved past each other, how a smile could change a mood, and how a brief exchange could leave a lasting impression. Michael, on the other hand, walked to his car after finishing paperwork, replaying the image of me in the lobby. He did not know why he lingered on it, yet it brought a sense of unusual anticipation, a pause in his otherwise regimented day. We both returned to our respective apartments as evening fell, the city lights illuminating streets and reflections in puddles, creating a sense of parallel yet separate worlds. While I prepared dinner and listened to the hum of the refrigerator, Michael sat in his office, reviewing reports with distracted eyes, feeling the subtle tension of a thought he could not place. That night, sleep was difficult for both of us, our minds unconsciously wandering back to the brief, charged encounter. The world outside continued its rhythm, but inside, two lives had intersected in a way neither expected, creating curiosity, reflection, and a quiet anticipation for what might come next. The ordinary had become infused with uncertainty and interest, leaving both of us on the threshold of a story we had only just begun to live. The next morning arrived wrapped in pale sunlight and the familiar sounds of the city waking outside my apartment window. But something felt different. I stood in my kitchen pouring coffee, staring at the steam rising from the mug while replaying the previous day in my mind. It should have been a simple errand. Find a wallet. Return it. Move on. Yet Michael Romano's expression kept finding its way back into my thoughts. Not because he was famous. Not because of the stories people whispered about him. It was because of the way he had looked at me, as though he was trying to solve a question he had not expected to ask. I shook my head and laughed quietly at myself. It was ridiculous. People met strangers every day. Life continued. That was how the world worked. By 9 o'clock, I was back at the bookstore, arranging new arrivals on a display table near the entrance. Customers wandered through the aisles. Soft music played through the speakers overhead. The familiar routine slowly pushed the memory aside. For a few hours, everything felt normal again. Then shortly after lunch, the bell above the front door chimed. I glanced up automatically and nearly dropped the book in my hands. Michael Romano had just walked into the bookstore. The entire room seemed to pause for a second, not because anyone recognized him. Most customers were absorbed in their own worlds. The pause happened inside me. He looked different from the day before. Less formal. Still dressed well, but without the imposing atmosphere of the corporate tower behind him. He walked slowly between the shelves, studying titles with genuine interest. For several moments he did not even look in my direction. Then eventually his eyes found mine. A faint smile appeared. "Good afternoon," he said. I blinked. "Good afternoon. I hope I am not interrupting. You are in a bookstore." "That is a fair point." His smile widened slightly. To my surprise, I laughed. The tension I expected never arrived. Instead, there was something strangely comfortable about the conversation. Michael glanced toward a nearby display. "I realized yesterday that I never properly thanked you." "You thanked me." "Not enough." He reached into his jacket and handed me a small envelope. Immediately I shook my head. "No. You have not even looked inside." "I know what is inside. It is only a gesture. Returning a wallet does not require payment." For the first time, genuine surprise crossed his face. Most people probably accepted gifts from men like Michael Romano without hesitation. I pushed the envelope back toward him. Keeping it would make the whole thing feel wrong. He studied me for several seconds before slowly taking it back. Something unreadable passed through his expression. Respect, perhaps. Or curiosity. Maybe both. The conversation drifted toward books after that. He asked what I was reading. I asked whether he actually enjoyed novels or merely wanted an excuse to visit. He laughed at that. A real laugh. Warm and unexpected. Nearly 20 minutes passed before either of us noticed. Eventually, another customer approached asking for help, and I excused myself. When I returned a few minutes later, Michael was already heading toward the door. He paused before leaving. "Thank you again, Sarah." The way he said my name felt oddly deliberate. Then he disappeared into the afternoon crowd. I stood there watching through the window long after he was gone. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet certainty began to grow. Returning that wallet had not been the end of a story. It had been the beginning. The day moved forward with the usual rhythm of the city outside my window, but inside, the air felt charged with unspoken possibilities. By late morning, I had returned to my usual seat behind the counter at the bookstore, arranging new arrivals and scanning the pages of a novel, when a familiar presence caught my attention before I could even lift my eyes, and there he was again, Michael Romano, standing near the entrance as if he had materialized from the morning light itself. His expression, a mixture of patience and curiosity that made my heartbeat quicken unexpectedly. He stepped forward with deliberate ease, his shoes making soft taps on the wooden floor, and greeted me with a polite nod. "I hope I am not intruding again," he said, and I shook my head, trying to keep my voice steady. "Not at all, you are welcome." We both smiled faintly, the previous encounter having eased the tension that had seemed almost tangible. He glanced around the bookstore with genuine interest, picking up a book here, adjusting a display there, yet always keeping his gaze returning to me intermittently. Finally approaching with a calm demeanor, he asked about my favorite sections, which led to a casual conversation about literature and life. The way he listened attentively made the small talk feel significant and rare, a pause in the ordinary flow of the day. Customers moved through the aisles, their chatter forming a soft backdrop, but my focus remained on the man who had chosen to come back. The way he spoke with respect and mild amusement revealed a side seldom seen. He handed me a small, wrapped gift, insisting it was just a token of appreciation, yet I declined gently, insisting the gesture was unnecessary. We laughed quietly, the shared moment deepening a connection neither of us fully understood yet. He stayed for nearly an hour, asking thoughtful questions about books and sharing insights about the city. His presence was commanding yet not overbearing, a mixture of charm and humility that made the time pass quickly. The clock seemed irrelevant, the usual routine faded into the background. By the time he left, he paused at the door, offering a sincere, "Thank you for your time, Sarah," and I watched as he walked away, feeling that something subtle but transformative had occurred, a quiet anticipation building within me, the encounter leaving an indelible impression that the day had shifted slightly. The world felt both familiar and suddenly open to possibilities. The afternoon continued with a lighter heart, the ordinary scenes of the bookstore now tinged with the extraordinary memory of a visitor whose presence had quietly disrupted the monotony. Each customer's smile and movement seemed more vivid. Each page turned in my own book now carried the weight of possibility. Michael Romano's return had created a space for something unexpected, something that might grow beyond simple acquaintance, a beginning of a narrative that neither of us could have predicted yet felt natural in its unfolding. The gentle rhythm of the day carried on, but I knew that the ordinary had been touched by the extraordinary, and the world had subtly shifted in ways that promised more than a single encounter could ever suggest. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows, casting warm light across the familiar bookstore aisles, and I moved between shelves with a calm attention, arranging new titles and brushing my fingers over spines as if to absorb the stories they held, when the sound of the bell above the door broke the quiet rhythm. And there he was, Michael Romano, standing with a composed demeanor, a slight smile hinting at curiosity and something deeper. He approached without haste, his gaze attentive, yet gentle, greeting me warmly. "I hope I am not interrupting your work," and I assured him that he was welcome, as he walked slowly down the central aisle, taking in the surroundings with genuine interest while occasionally glancing toward me, our earlier encounters having established a comfortable familiarity that allowed conversation to flow effortlessly. He asked about my recommendations for a certain author, and we discussed themes, character motivations, and the way stories can mirror life. His questions were thoughtful, revealing both intelligence and a keen interest in understanding others. As he selected a few books, handing them to me for suggestions, we talked about upcoming releases, our laughter mingling with the soft hum of the city outside. The atmosphere was intimate yet light, filled with a mutual respect that made the ordinary actions of browsing and recommending feel significant. At one point, he noticed a section I had curated for local authors, and we spent time discussing the stories behind them, our dialogue weaving between personal anecdotes and literary insights. He commented on the subtle details I had chosen to display, and I shared the reasons behind each arrangement. Our interaction felt like a dance of discovery, each movement and word deliberate yet natural. He then shared a small insight from his own life, something personal yet carefully measured, which prompted a thoughtful response from me. Bridging the gap between casual conversation and meaningful connection, he stayed for quite some time, his presence grounding the space without overwhelming it, and as the afternoon waned, he finally approached the counter, returning the books with careful consideration and a gentle expression of gratitude. "Thank you for your time and insight, Sarah," he said, and I found myself smiling in acknowledgement. The ordinary day transformed into one marked by subtle significance and quiet anticipation. As he left, the light in the bookstore seemed softer, carrying the weight of the moments shared, the conversations that hinted at more than just friendly exchange, and a sense of new possibilities quietly settling over the familiar space. Every detail, from the placement of books to the echo of footsteps, felt heightened in meaning, suggesting that what began as a simple afternoon encounter could unfold into something far more profound, the rhythm of the store continuing around me while a gentle awareness lingered that the ordinary had shifted, touched by the extraordinary presence of someone whose attention and thoughtfulness made time feel expanded. Every page I handled thereafter carried the resonance of the shared dialogue. Every glance at the entrance held a subtle hope, and the day, though seemingly unchanged, had become a canvas for possibilities shaped by the quiet depth of human connection. The following week arrived with the quiet certainty of routine, yet nothing felt entirely routine anymore. Every morning I still unlocked the bookstore at 9 o'clock. I still arranged displays, recommended novels, and greeted familiar customers by name. On the surface, my life looked exactly the same. But beneath that surface, something had shifted. It was subtle, almost impossible to explain. I found myself glancing toward the entrance more often than before. Not because I expected anything. At least that was what I told myself. Yet every time the bell above the door chimed, a small part of me looked up automatically. 3 days passed without seeing Michael Romano. Then 4. Then 5. I told myself that was normal. Men like him probably had responsibilities stretching across the entire city. Important meetings. Endless obligations. Lives that moved at a completely different speed from mine. Still, I noticed his absence. That realization bothered me more than it should have. Late Friday afternoon, a heavy rainstorm rolled across Chicago. The sidewalks outside became rivers of reflected light. Most customers hurried home early, leaving the bookstore unusually quiet. I was organizing a shipment of new arrivals when the front door opened. A gust of cool air entered first. Then Michael stepped inside. Rain dotted the shoulders of his dark coat. For reasons I could not fully understand, relief immediately washed through me. His expression softened slightly when he saw me. "You look surprised. You disappeared." The words escaped before I could stop them. His eyebrows lifted with amusement. "Disappeared? For almost a week. I did not realize my attendance was being monitored." I laughed despite myself. It was not good. His smile suggested he did not entirely believe me. The bookstore was nearly empty. Rain tapped steadily against the windows. The city outside seemed distant, wrapped in gray shadows and blurred headlights. Michael wandered through the shelves for several minutes before eventually joining me near a display table. Unlike previous visits, there was less caution between us now. The conversation flowed naturally. We talked about books at first, then childhood memories, favorite places in the city, small details that normally remained hidden during ordinary conversations. I learned that Michael genuinely loved architecture. He admitted to spending hours studying historic buildings whenever he traveled. He learned that I secretly dreamed of writing a novel someday. The confession felt embarrassing. Yet instead of laughing, he looked thoughtful. "You should write it. It is not that simple. Most worthwhile things are not." There was something about the certainty in his voice that made me pause. He believed what he was saying. Completely. For a brief moment, silence settled between us. Comfortable silence. Rare silence. The kind that does not demand to be filled. Outside, rain continued falling. Inside, the bookstore felt smaller somehow. Warmer. More personal. Eventually, Michael glanced toward the window. "Have you eaten dinner?" The question caught me off guard. Not yet. Then allow me to solve that problem. I immediately recognized the invitation hidden beneath the statement. My pulse quickened. He noticed. Of course he noticed. Michael Romano seemed to notice everything. It is just dinner, he said calmly. Two people having a conversation somewhere that serves better coffee than this bookstore. I looked toward the rain-covered streets beyond the glass. Then back at him. Every sensible part of me suggested caution. Yet another part of me remembered the way he listened. The way he respected boundaries. The way every encounter somehow felt easier than the last. Slowly I smiled. And for the first time since finding that wallet beside a rain-soaked bench, I allowed myself to wonder where this story might actually lead. The rain had softened into a light mist by the time we left the bookstore, turning the city into a landscape of glowing reflections and blurred colors, and for a moment neither of us spoke as we walked side by side beneath the shelter of nearby awnings, the silence carrying an unexpected comfort rather than awkwardness, as though conversation was no longer something we needed to force but something that simply appeared whenever it was meant to. Michael led me to a small restaurant tucked between two historic buildings several blocks away, a place that felt warm and inviting rather than extravagant, and that surprised me. I had expected something grand, something designed to impress. Instead, it felt personal, intentional. The hostess greeted him by name, and yet there was nothing performative about the interaction. We were shown to a quiet table near a window overlooking the wet streets outside, and as the city lights reflected across the glass, I found myself studying the man sitting across from me with growing curiosity. The Michael Romano people talked about and the Michael Romano sitting in front of me felt like two entirely different people. During dinner, the conversation drifted naturally from books to family, from childhood memories to dreams we had never spoken aloud to anyone else. He told me about growing up on the south side of the city, about long afternoons spent exploring old neighborhoods and imagining what kind of future waited beyond them. I shared stories about my parents, about the bookstore, and about the novel I had secretly wanted to write for years but never had the courage to begin. Each time I dismissed the dream, Michael challenged me gently. Not with pressure. With belief. It was a strange feeling. Most people offered encouragement because they thought they should. Michael listened as though my ambitions were facts waiting to happen. At one point he asked what stopped me from writing. I stared down at my coffee cup for a moment before answering honestly. Fear. The word hung between us. Fear of failing, he asked. Fear of finding out I am not good enough. His expression softened. Most people spend their lives avoiding the things they care about, because they are afraid of that answer. And you? I asked. What are you afraid of? For the first time all evening he hesitated. The pause was brief but it was real. Regret, he finally said. The kind that follows you because you never took the chance. Something about that answer lingered with me. Maybe because it felt genuine. Maybe because it revealed a side of him few people ever saw. As the evening continued, the distance between us seemed to shrink in subtle ways. Not physically. Emotionally. The city outside faded into the background while conversation carried us through subjects neither of us expected to discuss. Hours passed without either of us noticing. Eventually, the restaurant began emptying. Chairs were being stacked near the entrance. Staff members moved quietly through closing routines. Yet neither of us seemed eager for the evening to end. When we finally stepped back onto the sidewalk, the rain had completely stopped. The streets shimmered beneath golden streetlights. Michael looked at me for a long moment before speaking. I am glad you found that wallet. I smiled. I almost kept walking. He laughed softly. Then I am very glad you did not. And as we stood there beneath the quiet glow of the city, I realized that somewhere along the way this had stopped feeling like coincidence and started feeling like the beginning of something neither of us had planned. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting narrow lines across the small apartment where I was preparing for a day I had not anticipated would be so transformative, and yet, there was a sense of expectation in the air that I could not ignore. A quiet tension that seemed to pull me toward the inevitable encounter waiting just beyond the threshold. Michael Romano had left a note under my door the previous evening, an invitation that was more a challenge than a request, urging me to meet him at a quiet cafe on the edge of the city, one known for its understated charm and intimate atmosphere, a place where conversations could unfold without interruption, and I found myself walking toward it with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation, wondering what the day would hold. As I approached, I noticed him seated at a corner table, the morning light catching the subtle angles of his face, his expression calm yet attentive, watching the ebb and flow of people outside as if the world moved to a rhythm he alone could hear, and I felt a strange familiarity, as though this was not our first meeting despite the briefness of our acquaintance. Michael gestured to the empty chair across from him, and as I settled into it, the space between us felt charged with a quiet intensity, a shared awareness that neither of us had to speak to acknowledge. We began with casual conversation about the city, the weather, and the small peculiarities of the streets we walked daily, yet beneath the surface, there was a current of meaning, subtle shifts in tone and gesture that conveyed more than words alone could capture. He asked about my work, about the novel I had hinted at writing, and I spoke openly for the first time, revealing my fears and hesitations, and he listened with patience, responding not with judgment but with questions that made me reflect on my own ambitions and choices, his presence a mirror that allowed me to see parts of myself I had kept hidden. Hours passed as we discussed ideas, possibilities, and dreams, and with each passing minute, the atmosphere between us deepened, a quiet understanding developing that was both exhilarating and grounding. At one point he leaned forward, speaking softly about the nature of chance encounters and the subtle ways they could alter the course of a life, and I felt a thrill at the recognition that our meeting, which had begun with a simple act of returning a wallet, had evolved into a moment that might shape both of our futures. As the cafe filled with the murmur of other patrons, we remained in our own bubble, a world defined by the exchange of thoughts and the gentle rhythm of conversation, and when we finally stepped outside into the warmth of the late morning sun, there was a sense of shared anticipation, a feeling that something significant had begun, something neither of us could yet fully name but both sensed would linger in the days to come, weaving itself into the fabric of our lives in ways subtle yet undeniable. The days that followed felt different in ways that were difficult to explain and impossible to ignore. Chicago remained the same city it had always been. The train still rattled through the streets every morning. The bookstore still opened at 9 o'clock. Customers still wandered between shelves searching for stories that might help them escape their own lives for a few hours. Yet every familiar detail seemed brighter somehow, touched by a quiet sense of possibility that had not existed before. Michael became a regular presence in my life, though never in the overwhelming way I once imagined a man like him would. He never demanded my attention. He never tried to control my time. Instead, he appeared in small moments. A cup of coffee delivered to the bookstore on a difficult afternoon. A message asking whether I had finally started writing the first chapter of my novel. A conversation that stretched far longer than either of us intended because neither wanted to be the first to leave. What surprised me most was not his persistence. It was his patience. Michael Romano could command entire rooms with a single glance, yet with me he moved carefully, as though trust was something valuable enough to earn rather than expect. One evening several weeks later, we stood overlooking the Chicago River as the city lights shimmered across the water below. The air carried the first signs of autumn. A cool breeze drifted between the buildings. We had spent hours walking through neighborhoods neither of us had visited in years, sharing memories and stories that seemed insignificant until spoken aloud. For a while neither of us said anything. The silence felt comfortable, familiar. The kind of silence that only exists when two people no longer feel the need to impress one another. Eventually Michael looked toward me. "Do you ever think about how strange this is?" he asked. "Which part?" "The fact that none of this happens if you do not stop for 5 seconds beside a bench." I laughed softly. "I think about that more than I probably should." He smiled. "So do I." The river reflected thousands of lights beneath us. Somewhere nearby a boat horn echoed through the night. The city continued moving around us, unaware of the conversation taking place above the water. "You changed something for me, Sarah," he said quietly. I turned toward him. "How?" He took a moment before answering. "You reminded me that the most important things rarely arrive the way we expect." The sincerity in his voice left no room for doubt. For the first time since finding that wallet, I fully understood what had happened. This was never really about chance. It was about choice. A choice to stop. A choice to help. A choice to remain open when life offered an unexpected connection. I smiled and looked back toward the skyline. Then maybe we both learned something. Maybe we did. We stood there together as the city lights stretched endlessly into the distance, neither of us knowing exactly what the future would bring. Yet for the first time, uncertainty did not feel frightening. It felt hopeful. Because sometimes a story does not begin with a grand moment. Sometimes it begins with a forgotten wallet, a simple act of kindness, and two people willing to see what happens next. And standing there beside Michael, watching Chicago glow beneath the night sky, I realized that the smallest decisions truly can change the rest of your life.